This machine is 3D printing steak. The goal is to create a piece of meat without killing a cow. And this Israeli startup is one of the dozens of companies racing to perfect the process.
It turns out that cows aren't necessarily the most efficient way of making beef.
It's no secret that beef is one of the most damaging foods for the planet. The search for a solution has become a big business. But can lab-grown steak or plant-based alternatives really fix the broken beef industry? The global beef industry produced nearly 75 million tons of meat in 2020. That's about 19 pounds for each person on the planet. Each step of the supply chain is doing damage. Let's start on the farm. Raising cattle requires lots of land. On average, tropical rainforests the size of El Salvador are cleared every year to make room for cattle. These cows release tons of methane, one of the most potent greenhouse gases. Then there are the emissions from slaughtering, processing, packaging, and transporting beef. Globally, beef was responsible for 3 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions in 2010, about twice as much as all vehicles in the US at the time. But plant-based alternatives to meat have grown into a $5.6 billion industry. Beyond Meat has made its way into an estimated 135,000 grocery stores and restaurants. Its signature burger is made by using heating, cooling, and pressure to give plant-based proteins a meat-like texture. A study funded by the company found that, pound for pound, its product generates about 90% less greenhouse gas emissions than traditional beef. Still, for many scientists, the holy grail is to not just imitate meat, but actually make it. Back in 2013, professor and scientist Mark Post unveiled the first lab-grown burger at a live tasting in London. This one patty cost over $325,000 to make.
It's close to meat. It's not that juicy, but the consistency is perfect.
I think that was kind of one of those pivotal moments where you're like, oh, this could be a thing.
But it wasn't until 2020 that funding for lab-grown food really started to pour in, with some startups drawing high-profile investments from the likes of Bill Gates and even traditional meat companies.
It's like everyone wants to hop on that bandwagon.
Now, researchers in Israel are taking on one of the biggest challenges: growing steaks in a lab.
When it comes to steak, you're bringing together the full range, essentially, of tissue engineering technologies and cell growth technologies.
Simon Fried and his team are using stem cells to create a steak they say is more ethical, although it's not vegetarian. Here's how it works. Look at this perfectly marbled steak. The white stuff is fat, that gives it flavor. The pink stuff is muscle, that's for protein. Scientists had to figure out how to recreate both. First, they take stem cells from a cow and then grow them in a lab.
That means that we're replacing the body of the animal with what's called a bioreactor.
Getting the cells to grow under these conditions is no easy task.
Usually cells are attached to something. They grow in a petri dish or flasks, and they want to attach to something.
Here, the cells grow suspended in a liquid, where they divide roughly once a day. Then scientists move the massive cells to the tissue engineering lab, where they make something called bioinks.
Because this is the beginning of the bioprinting stage, the inks that we're using actually contain the cells that we've been growing in the labs previously.
There's one for muscle and one for fat. They're fed through these nozzles, and technicians can customize how much of each goes into the steak.
You can print any structure that you're able to design. So you upload a file to the printer and you can present a steak of pretty much any size and also any proportions.
One key challenge in this process is keeping the printing room sterile.
These are living cells and they're being jetted through the printer. So everything that can be done to keep the air clean of any impurities is necessary.
Otherwise, there's a chance the cells could die. The steaks aren't quite finished when they leave the printing room. The cells still need time to develop into muscle and fat tissue.
From a few days up to a few weeks, we can start seeing the muscle fibers starting to contract spontaneously in the dish.
which looks like this. The process takes about a month.
And after that, you can treat it as you would a regular piece of meat.
But meat tech is still a long way away from selling its steak to consumers for a few reasons. Remember how the cells were growing in that liquid? Well, it contains something called fetal bovine serum, or FBS.
In layman's terms, it's baby cow blood.
It's one of the most controversial parts of growing meat in a lab because it comes from fetuses of pregnant cows that were slaughtered. But it's necessary for the cells to grow. Simon told us they are using FBS as part of the research process, but they plan to eventually replace it with something else.
Our plans are that it shouldn't be part of any at-scale commercial activity.
But an alternative that's just as effective has yet to be found. Simon wouldn't give us an estimate on when the steak will be ready for the public to try, or how much it costs to make the prototypes. In the meantime, he says the company is focused on a more attainable goal, like this hybrid product made of soy and beef fat grown in Meatech's lab.
The texture of our culture kebab is nearly the same like a real kebab.
Meatech is building a new facility in Belgium to start making foods like these on a larger scale. But it's unclear how sustainable a scaled-up lab-grown beef industry would really be.
We don't know what the carbon footprint looks like to actually scale these up in the amount of space and energy it will take.
And this is all a gamble on something most consumers haven't even tried yet. So far, meat made in a lab can only be sold in Singapore, where one company debuted its chicken nuggets back in 2020. Despite the uncertainty, companies working on lab-grown meat have raised nearly $2 billion. They're betting that the rest of the world will follow Singapore's lead and start granting lab-grown foods approval for sale. But even if lab-grown meat manages to win over regulators and the public, could it actually replace beef?
I'm honestly not fully convinced that this is the right way to mass produce meat for the public to be eating based off of how long this has been developing and how little we've seen.
So while we wait on lab-grown beef, consumers looking to reduce their carbon footprint can still turn to plant-based options.